Welcome to this rapid revision video for the Whitechapel unit, looking at policing Whitechapel. Let's start with H Division. The Metropolitan Police was divided into 20 divisions, of which H Division covered the Whitechapel area. The division consisted of about 500 ordinary police officers who were supervised by 37 sergeants. H Division was led by a superintendent in charge of a chief inspector, and there were 27 inspectors. CID, that's the Criminal Investigation Department, assigned 15 detectives to H Division. In the almost 60 years since the formation of the police, most middle-class people saw them as respectable keepers of law and order, with local beat officers known as reliable and helpful bobbies on the beat. Working-class people wanted to live a life free of crime and disorder too, and accepted the police as a part of this. However, in areas like Whitechapel, relations were more strained, as economic and working conditions made people angry at the government. They were seen as heavy-handed enforcers of government decisions, and so the police were less liked. Policemen were nicknamed bobbies after Robert Peel, who had started the Metropolitan Police. But what were the duties of the bobby on the beat? H Division police officers had regular and predictable duties. Officers marched out of the police station and into Whitechapel, leaving the marching column as he arrived at his assigned beat. They were supposed to work in pairs, but regularly they patrolled alone due to manpower shortages. Night duties often consisted of stopping and challenging people who were out after dark in order to find out what they were up to and to establish any suspicious activities. Constables met with their sergeant at points in their duty to update them on what was happening, which the sergeant would then log in writing. Constables were fined or dismissed if they did not give a really good reason for being away from their beat, or if they missed a crime happening on their patch. Much of this work was incredibly boring, but occasionally it was absolutely terrifying, particularly when they were working on their own. This meant that not all the recruits were suitable for the work. Some were frightened by it, and some were actually attracted by the excitement. This meant that the sergeants had to keep a very close eye on all the constables to ensure that they were patrolling the city effectively. In areas where the police were not respected, typically poorer areas like Whitechapel, violent attacks were quite common. On the 2nd of June 1883, the Illustrated Police News published the following article, accompanied by this image on the right. Savage attack on a policeman. John Harris, Jane Reynolds and Alfred Lindsay were charged in committing a murderous assault on Dennis Mortimer, a constable. Constable Mortimer heard loud cries of "Stop him!" and as he tackled Harris, a mob of young ruffians collected around him and commenced pelting him with stones and hitting him with sticks. Mortimer made strenuous efforts to protect himself, but on drawing his truncheon, according to a witness, the female Reynolds wrenched it from his hand and struck him on the side of the head with it, and another girl also hit him about the head. The prisoner and his gang made good their escape, leaving the constable unconscious. Publications like this could print sensationalised versions of events, but this also serves to show the kinds of challenges beat officers had in policing areas like Whitechapel, where they were often alone and where often people were hostile towards them. The next challenge for the police we're going to consider is prostitution. One challenge faced by H Division was the amount of prostitution in Whitechapel. Work was hard enough for men to find, let alone for women, for whom employment opportunities were even more scarce. Faced with starvation, some turned to prostitution to support themselves. By 1888, it was estimated that there were 62 brothels and 1,200 such sex workers in Whitechapel alone, reflecting the hardships faced by so many residents. Some were able to rent a room from which to work as a sex worker, but others worked in brothels. The most desperate simply walked the streets homeless, incredibly vulnerable. Part of the challenge for H Division is that being a sex worker or prostitute was not illegal, but it was considered a social problem that needed to be monitored and where possible dealt with. Many women in this work were vulnerable to rape and assault, in fact probably all of them. Additionally, with no effective contraception available, abortions were common. These were not available legally, and many women died from infections or other complications of these backstreet abortions. Middle-class people had little sympathy for those that they termed unfortunates, not realising that for many the alternative was starvation. For the most part, beat officers tried to keep the streets as safe as possible, whilst turning a blind eye to illegal abortions. Another problem facing the police was alcohol. Many people in Whitechapel tried to escape the misery of their poverty through alcohol. Very strong drink was available at tiny prices, and virtually every street had at least one place where it could be bought. Aside from public houses, gin palaces sold very strong gin at low prices. They were typically lavishly decorated, further tempting people to use alcohol to escape the squalor of their surroundings. Opium dens could range from dark basements to elegant bars similar to the gin palaces. Here people smoked the drug opium. Within just a mile of Whitechapel Road, there were 45 pubs, gin palaces and opium dens. Drunkenness and intoxication frequently led to violence, and alcoholism fueled crime and stealing as people struggled to fund their addiction. H Division found that alcohol was a common cause of, or aggravating factor in, many of the crimes that they dealt with. Yet another problem faced by H Division was protection rackets. Whitechapel's narrow, poorly lit streets and multiple points of approach and exit increased the challenges of policing the district. Gangs prowled the streets and threatened business owners with violence unless they paid a fee. Demanding payment in return for not smashing up a property or attacking people is known as a protection racket. Eastern European immigrants started their own gangs too. One was known as the Bessarabian Tigers and another the Odessians. H Division found it very difficult to build a case against such gangs. Their victims were too terrified to give evidence against them. Whereas the police took an active role in preventing fights and disorder elsewhere in London, H Division was too stretched to effectively prevent or step in to stop fights in Whitechapel. They found it safer to let violent communities just get on with it and sort out their own problems violently. The final challenge facing H Division, which we're going to consider in this video, is that of community relations. Once the police had become generally respected and accepted, the government expected them to fulfil functions that they had not been initially intended to perform. While the poor generally accepted the need for a police force, they often disagreed with their tactics, especially where they had more to do with social work than preventing crime. One of the duties of the police was taking people to the workhouse or children to school, and this was understandably met with hostility. People hated going to the workhouse for what are probably obvious reasons, given the conditions there. But in terms of schooling, well, that might be a bit more surprising. But remember that many of these families were relying on the income provided by working children to keep their heads above water. Moving on prostitutes was also resented, where it was all a woman could do to survive, as was sadly often the case in Whitechapel. There were also many laws passed to control a wide variety of social issues, such as begging, mental illness, which was termed lunacy in 1888, pub fights, traffic problems, street sanitation, accidents, fires and more. All of these came under the remit of the police. Some of these were simply ignored. An 1867 law requiring dogs to be muzzled in public was ignored even by the respectable, educated middle classes. It was soon quietly dropped. The police simply couldn't enforce it. However, at other times, virtually everyone recognised the value of good police work. Efforts to track down missing persons and stray children were very much appreciated. Work controlling out-of-control horses and dogs was admired. The police ran soup kitchens for the hungry, though this had an ulterior motive in that it was a good way to bribe or trick people into conversations into giving up valuable intelligence when cash rewards weren't allowed. Many poor people recognised that they needed the police to defend them in their often brutal and impoverished lives. However, the very fact that the police were in a position of authority was a double-edged sword. Many of the poor also felt that the police fussed over appearances and manners instead of bringing real safety to the streets. They wanted criminals to be caught. Instead, they often felt that the police were patronising working people and trying to tell them how to behave. So let's sum up our final points. H Division was the Met Division responsible for policing Whitechapel. Led by a superintendent, a chief inspector and a number of inspectors and sergeants, it had about 500 officers on its staff. Beat officers had to report to a sergeant to show that they were doing their jobs properly and had to account for times when they were away from their beat or missed crimes. Some people in Whitechapel resented the police, leading to attacks on them. Social problems in Whitechapel stretched the resources of the police. Prostitution was not illegal, so officers largely let it carry on and ignored the backstreet abortions. Alcohol was a serious aggravating problem in crimes, but with so many drinking establishments it was hard to do anything about it. Local people were too scared to help the police tackle protection rackets. Violence within the community was often left to sort itself. However, police work in helping protect the public, assist in emergencies and keep the peace were appreciated. Where the poor felt that the police were being controlling or telling people what to do, there was far less support. That's the end of this rapid revision video. Thanks very much for watching. Please do drop it a like and subscribe to the channel if it was helpful.